is a willow tree. It looks a whole lot different from the willows that I've got in coastal California, where every single creek is choked with them when it hits the water. 1.5 to 2 inches thick for the posts. And then for the slats on the seat, we can go down to about 1/2 inch thick, but not really thinner than that. So 1/2 to 1.5 inches, something you can cut with loppers or with a small pruning saw is what we're after. And even if you're working with living willow, especially if you cut it out of season, you want to take all the side branches and all the leaves off because you want to encourage the plant to put its energy into rooting. So if you're working with a live plant, it's like taking cuttings and trying to propagate them, exactly the same thing. You take out some woody growth, trim it down to a little stalk, and then you stick it in water and hope that it will root. So that's exactly what we're doing with these things, even though they're a slightly larger scale. It's kind of more about working with the material that's on the site, and particularly looking at things that wouldn't normally be viewed as useful, because it doesn't create a lumber grade of material. But really, if you can learn to work with small sticks, they're one of the most abundant resources around. So that's kind of the game. I take a lot of my inspiration from indigenous structures and indigenous builders, just looking at ways at which people around the world have used the available plant material they had at their time. So. I'm really interested not just in controlling the structures and in controlling the form. You can kind of get into this thing of, look at this neat trick I can do, but I really like to preserve the wildness and the flexibility of it, because I'm interested in illustrating this relationship with the natural world, where you're collaborating, you're moving back and forth with what the plant wants to do, not controlling it utterly, but letting there be a certain amount of fuzzy chaos in there. And I think that's really kind of a metaphor for more the way that I'd like to see human culture interacting with nature. Most of the people on the planet live in an urban environment, and it's easy in such a setting to forget that the natural forces are still very much there. But you can see it in the way that weeds grow. Any place where there's a little bit of soil, even if it's bad soil, something's going to start growing. And if we can turn our awareness to the potential for land and soil and health and natural forces that does exist even in the city, and then, a lot of city designers are talking about weaving green corridors through and making carless areas and just expanding, taking fences down and making more use of shared space. If every tree that was planted in a city were a fruit tree rather than some decorative thing, think what a difference that would make. People wouldn't go hungry anymore. So all of that stuff is fairly possible. If all the storm water that just runs off the streets and into the drains were going into the ground and we're feeding planted areas, again, everybody would be provided for. These are just fairly small changes, really. They don't take a brilliant inspiration, but if they were adopted systematically, a lot of the problems that we take for granted at this point in terms of food and shelter and stuff like that could be solved instantly at relatively minimal cost. So that's the kind of thing that I hope we can move towards. Certainly the potential for sustainable culture is already out there. Nothing needs to be invented. It just needs to be implemented and brought together into places where the community cares about such things. So.